It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large, 60 minutes of smart talk radio featuring guests from all walks of life in conversation with your host, Warner Lewis. So sit back and lend us your ears for the next hour. Now here with today's first guest is the host of Lewis at Large, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another segment of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck. And of course, that means some smart talk radio is in your future, and this segment, no exception. We're going to be talking about a subject that we have never talked about in the many, many years of this show, and that is the actor Marlon Brando, and specifically Brando's Smile, a brand new work from Boston University professor Susan Mizurchi, and she is she's not only a scholar there, she has also written about American culture, American film, and libraries in general. Boy, I'm really blowing this one badly, but Susan, how are you, my friend?
I'm fine. You sound good to me.
Okay. Well, listen, the work is called Brando's Smile, and as I think back, we've had quite a few actors and actresses on here. We've talked about them, certainly, amongst the many other subjects. We've never talked about Marlon Brando, one of the gigantic figures, obviously, in American cinema and American theater in general. What is it that held such a special fascination to you about Marlon Brando?
Well, I grew up on the films, and I was just always fascinated by the acting, and like a lot of people, I wanted to know more about the person behind, these performances. And when new materials became available after Brando died in 2004, I started looking into them. And I found there's been a gaping hole in our understanding of the person who is widely considered to be the best actor of the 20th century. So here's the central discovery of the book, that Brando had a mind, that his curiosity about the world, that his craving for knowledge was as great as his more legendary appetites for women and food. And what I say is that we've been so preoccupied with the body, whether we're talking about the young, beautiful Brando of Streetcar and The Wild One, or, the Brando who got old and fat in The Score. We've overlooked the mind and the imagination, and also the conscience. And this, has all been revealed by research, by extensive research.
Yeah, and he, talk about, as you said, moving through a variety of incantations and variations. The young, street smart, almost sort of borderline hoodlum aspect, tough guy,
yes.
To more sensitive characters, to that of obviously of The Godfather, and beyond that, and outside and off the screen, the political statement that was made at the Oscars, his curiosity and association with a wide variety of people, events, and things. Certainly, indeed, was something somewhat of an enigma for sure. I'm curious as to one of the unique things that you did. You tracked down every book in a 4,000-plus collection of his that were auctioned off about a decade after, or right after his death, about a decade ago. And one of the things I'm curious to find out is what about someone's book collection in general tells Susan Mizurchi about them.
Oh, the thing here is just the range. And just to make one thing clear, I'm not claiming that Brando is an intellectual. It's that his interest, he was better than an intellectual, I would say. This was a man whose interests were genuinely unlimited. So there was a book that he annotated cover to cover on coconut wood, because he was interested in discovering the uses, of coconuts, because there were so many on his Tahitian island, Tetiaroa. And he had books on knots, and he had a Bible from every religion. The collection was especially deep in psychology. 1950s was the era of psychology, and Brando, he was fascinated by things that everyone was interested in, philosophy. He had a book called The Seeker's Handbook, which to me says so much about Brando, because this was a man who turned to books, to learn about other people, to learn about everything that he was interested in, to learn about the meaning of life. And so what I discovered, in his book collection was just how much this man depended on books, for an understanding of things. And he was, by the way, a spirited conversationalist in his books. He would, Lewis Thomas's Lives of a Cell was one of his favorites. He annotated it cover to cover. And he would write in the margins, who says, or how do you know that? He would express his skepticism as well as his agreement and excitement. What really was, exceptional about this collection is how much of it was annotated, how much Brando actually wrote in his books. I would say about a quarter to a third had marginal comments or marks. And by the way, one of his most common annotations, one was "get!" exclamation point, which was a reminder to himself to pick up the book that was mentioned. He built his collection from reading, in part. And the other was "dio," which was a reminder to himself, dialogue it meant. It was for a phrase that he liked, and he was planning to draw on it for a film. Because one of the other things I collected that was sold off at Christie's were Brando's personal film scripts. And from reviewing all of these film scripts, I discovered that Brando was responsible for many of his best lines in films.
Well, again, if you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio. Got an interesting one going here on a subject we have never talked about, Marlon Brando. Indeed, an icon from the American screens and theater, for sure. We're talking to someone that knows, indeed, much about him, cultural scholar, author, and Boston University professor Susan Mizurchi. And Susan, as what I don't think many people know about is the early years. Give us a little background about his upbringing and how did he get into the theater?
Yeah, well, he was from Omaha, Nebraska. He was, salt of the earth, middle America. The family moved when he was 6 to Evanston, Illinois. And his mother was an actress. His mother was actually quite a good actress at the Omaha Playhouse. And, one of the things that she used to, say to other actors was, stop acting. She knew the distinction between theatricality and being on stage, and how much more effective, being was. And she actually supported the career. She helped to launch the career of Henry Fonda, who was also from Omaha. And so there was a family, it was a family business to some extent. And Brando's sister was also an actress, but it was a tough growing up. The mother was a really terrible alcoholic, as was the father. The father was a bit of a brute, and one of the things that I discovered that really was just kind of incredible to me was that Brando's father was a great photographer. And Brando had, for someone born in 1924, just an incredibly well-documented childhood, wonderful photographs of him as a boy. And I found out from a cousin, a nephew I tracked down, that the father was a really avid amateur photographer and did his own developing. And so this was significant to me because Brando grew up posing for a camera. And one of the things that I also discovered, it's one of the reasons why the book has so many photographs, many photographs, many of which have never been seen before. Brando obliged so many of the famous photographers of his era. He posed for everyone. I mean, you name a major photographer, Margaret Bourke-White, Ruth Orkin, just one after the other. Carl Van Vechten, he posed. And I think he learned, in a sense, to love the camera and to be loved by it, as he was growing up. But it was a tough childhood. No question about the neglect, about the sense of abandonment by his mother in particular, which impacted on his relationships with women. he was very troubled. And one friendship, by the way, in his childhood that was enormously important was with Wally Cox, who we met in elementary school in Evanston, Illinois.
We know so much about him in film. What about theater? What about acting outside of the silver screen? What was his? I'm curious as to whether it's so many performers have a strong preference for one medium over another.
Yeah. He did both. It is a shame, as many said, that he never went back when he left after he left Broadway. But there were some really incredible performances there. And the first, the breakout performance was Truckline Cafe. This was directed by Harold Clurman, and Brando won an award for that performance, and it really conferred recognition. As in so many of his roles, both in theater and on film, he played a veteran, a military, a guy who'd been a soldier. And but one of the things to say about his acting, he became famous instantaneously at the age of 23. He struck Broadway gold in the performance of Stanley Kowalski on Broadway. And what Arthur Miller said about Brando's performance really sticks in the mind. He saw the streetcar performance in New Haven. They were just going around to do tryouts, and he said that what Brando had done in that performance single-handedly was to introduce sexuality onto the stage as an inevitable part of human experience. And and there were other great performances on Broadway, but there's the same range. I found the same range in his Broadway performances as on screen. There too, he was promoting his things he believed in, idealism on stage. A Flag is Born, Ben Hecht's play. He performed with Yiddish theater actor Paul Muni and also Celia Adler in that, and it was a play that was put on to raise money for victims of the Holocaust, 1946, and so there too, Brando was thinking very carefully about his acting being meaningful, his acting having a point beyond mere entertainment, but he wanted to enlighten people, and at a very young age, he saw that as a mission, really. And by the way, he actually wanted at one point to become a minister. It's so hard to believe, but I read this, and I was really struck by this. That he really had a sense that you're put on earth to do something good, not just to profit and enjoy yourself.
I've always got the sense that Marlon Brando wanted his work to speak for itself and was very committed to activities outside of his work, political and otherwise. Yes. And I never sensed he didn't, in a nice way, so to speak, he didn't care whether you liked what he was doing outside the screen or not. Yes. He was going to do it. And really, the last thing in the world he would have wanted was to be on the cover of People magazine, of all things.
That is true. This was a guy who just, at some very deep level, despised celebrity. And not because, it got in his way only. Although it did. He couldn't go out. He couldn't watch people the way he so loved doing because, he had become a spectacle in his own right. But I think there's a bigger reason, and I think the reason had to do in some ways with his Midwestern roots, that Brando was a Democrat, and he really disliked the notion that people would worship actors or worship politicians or worship anyone else. That he really believed that people they lost something of themselves in having this kind of idolatry. So there was a real contempt for celebrity, and I think beyond that, the one thing I would say about the activism is that he really always wanted to combine it with his acting and with his film performances. It's true what you're saying, that he was a man who marched to his own drummer in the classic sense and pursued what he believed in, and it was certainly true about his devotion to the Indians and, for decades, his commitment. I mean, this was a commitment that extended back to his childhood. I mean, his family was from Omaha, Nebraska, and he grew up hearing about the Indians displaced by white settlement there, from his mother and grandmother. But he really, he believed in these things deeply, and he really didn't care if people, disagreed, with his, or, if they thought he was odd. I mean, this guy was an iconoclast. I mean, he was someone who really did what, he wanted to do in some basic sense. Sometimes, to the detriment, without question, of his children and himself.
Again, we're talking with Professor Susan Mizurchi, and she is with she teaches at Boston University. She's also an author in her own right. We're talking about a brand new work called Brando's Smile. Susan, as he looked back on his career from the research that you did he have a particular part of which he was most proud, and maybe opposite one of which, if I could do it all over, I would not play that part again?
It's interesting that he definitely had a favorite role. He loved Burn. Burn was a film that was made in the late 60s. It was directed by Gillo Pontecorvo, and Brando thought that was one of his really great unheralded performances. He played a British colonialist agitator, and he loved doing British accents. By the way, that was his agent said he could always get Brando to take a part, if there was a British accent. And by the way, for all of his roles, he came up with specific, unique accents for the character, not just a British accent, but the particular region of Britain that, a character was from. But as far as, actually there was one role that I think he definitely regretted. That was in Columbus, The Discovery. That was a role that he took, this was, in the late part of his career. He was doing films more often for money. And this was a film that his friends in the Indian community considered a betrayal because it ended up really whitewashing the Columbus discovery story as opposed to representing it in the kind of realistic terms that Brando expected. And he wasn't able to persuade the producers or the director to change it, and he was really ashamed of himself for doing the role. And he actually, did speak regretfully about the role and also about his performance, which was one of his worst, really.
Well, we don't want to spoil too much of the book here, but within it, the work called Brando's Smile, there are at least 10 cool facts about Marlon Brando that most of us may not be aware of. One of which was, and I'd like to talk about 2 or 3 of them. Have you throw a couple out? Was he did his own makeup? Tell us about that.
Yes. Well, he loved makeup. He took a course in makeup at the New School in New York the year he was studying acting there with Stella Adler. And, he believed that, doing your own makeup was part of building a role. An actor had to do his own makeup. He had to choose his own costumes, choose his own props. The one time he deferred to professionals was during the Godfather. As he said, turning a guy in his mid-40s into, an old man required experts, and he let them take over there. But in general, he loved makeup. And, directors he worked with commented, on that, on Brando's sort of, commitment always to that aspect of building character.
When we talk about the whole concept of which I know is dear to your heart about book collections, Johnny Depp bought much of his book collection, and I find that interesting indeed.
Yes, I mean the fact that they were close friends is evident in what because he had the best stuff in Brando's book collection. I mean, he had first of all the 700 books on the American Indian, which would rival really a scholar's collection. I mean, Brando had Indian friends who were political scientists, and they helped him, build the collection. He wanted to know what was important to read, and he had it, and he read it. These were heavily annotated, too. But Depp also had Brando's Shakespeare collection, Brando's books on Freud. And for me, one of the greatest moments in my research was when Depp agreed, for me to come to his estate. They set me up in a little house on Depp's estate with all the books. And I just spent a week there just, photographing all the books and every drop of marginalia. And it was, one of the books he had that was really amazing was Brando's high school Emily Dickinson, collected poems of Emily Dickinson, or selected poetry of Emily Dickinson. And, he had written things. Here's a high school kid. He had written in the margin of one of her poems, nonconformist. Misspelled, but still, he recognized that Emily Dickinson was a fellow rebel. And, we know from Brando's films, how important rebellion was to him.
You went through every book, every page to see any kind of margin notes?
Yes, and every drop. If he made a mark, with a pencil on his books, I photographed it.
If you don't mind me asking, how did you find out the names and the individual works of all 4,000 plus works in his collection?
You mean the people who had bought them?
Yeah, and was there a list somewhere?
This was Christie's, and I have to say that if Christie's if the Brando estate had chosen a different auction house, this book might not have been possible. Christie's is like an archive, and what they did is they kept records of who had bought everything. And what they allowed me to do was to write anonymously I wrote as myself to the anonymous buyers, and they sent emails from me to them, and I told them what kind of book I had in mind. I said that, I thought there was room for a biography that, spent less time talking about the affairs and the tragedies and a little more time just, looking at the acting and the reading, which I'd begun to hear about from people and see evidence of. And so what the amazing thing is, all of these people responded to me. They all wrote to me, and I went all over the country, and the biggest book collection was in Moscow, if you can believe that. And the guy finally brought it to the Bronx because he was convinced that he could only sell it. This was actually a Russian collector who had bought it as an investment, and he brought it to the Bronx, and I spent 4 months there just photographing all the books he had. So it was quite an experience to meet also the people who bought things. And again, quite an impressive, John Zorn, the composer, I don't know if that's a name that's familiar to your listeners, but he bought stuff at the Brando auction. So just a lot of very, very impressive people who were just fascinated by the man and his acting.
What kind of reaction, help, non-help, reaction, good, bad, or indifferent, have you gotten from Marlon Brando's family?
Well, those have been, some of them have just not talked to me, but, a good, chunk, I would say, his two of his children, Miko and Rebecca, have been extremely, forthcoming in interviews and supportive. And his, there are some children, offspring, who just, don't want to talk to press. I think, in that sense, it's maybe still a feeling of preserving privacy. But they were fairly receptive. And the Brando estate, I think, basically, once they had heard that I had gone all over the world, basically collecting all these materials they had sold off, they then gave me full access to their archives. I think they thought, wow, this woman is really committed to finding out about a side of him that Yeah. So they gave me full access, and then I saw everything. I mean, all of his correspondences. I mean, as I said before, the love letters alone, are just astonishing. And but there's all kinds of audios, taped conversations between Brando and various people. And it's quite an astonishing range of materials. And again, Brando saved it all, which I think is quite striking as a kind of testimony of his sense of of his own importance. I would say. I mean, he was someone who didn't believe in putting himself above other people, but on the other hand, I think he did recognize that he had achieved something.
Well, an American icon indeed, Marlon Brando. The work is called Brando's Smile. The author is Professor Susan Mizurchi. She teaches again at Boston University as a cultural scholar, has many works to her credit. And Susan, how can people find out more? We've really piqued our interest here a little bit. How can people find out more about the work and get a copy of the book?
I hope it's in Kansas bookstores. It better be. It should be on Amazon without question. And I think it's definitely available at any local bookstores. So the more readers, I'd love people to learn about this side of Brando that was very exciting for me to discover too.
Well, we appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. Again, I've never talked about Marlon. Amazingly, I've never talked about him on the multiple years this show has been on the air. But thank you so much, and would love to have you on again.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
You bet. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.